In this video, we will talk about the Curve M tool, where the letter M stands for matching. The idea behind this tool, in fact, is to use curves inside Adobe Photoshop for matching some references both for color and luminosity, and this usually can be pretty hard to do, especially if you're not a Photoshop curves expert, But now, with the Mindthecolor extension and this tool, you can choose any color you want, just moving few sliders and try to reach any color you want for shadows, midtone and highlights, leaving to the panel the task of creating the right kind of curves you need. And of course, this can be a really big help especially for color grading, Now, let me show you how it works. To understand how the CurveM works, my advice is to start from an image like this. Here, as you can see, we have 3 sliders for each tonal range: highlights, midtones, and shadows. And for each one, you can choose the hue, the saturation, and the brightness of the color you want. Now, let's try first to match a simple gray for the highlights. And once I move the brightness slider like this, you can see that the panel creates a curves adjustment layer. Now, let's take a look at the curves. As you can see, the RGB curve is untouched and the desired color is reached by shaping the single red, green, and blue channel curves. This is before and this is after. Now, if I want a warm gray, all I need to do is to move the saturation and the hue slider, for example, like this, until I reach the color I want. Let's say something like this one. And every time I move a slider, the adjustment layer is modified to match the target I want. For example, if I want to have a light green cast in the midtones, I will move the saturation and the hue slider until I get the result I want. Let's say something like this, or maybe something like this color. And the same for the shadows. Let's say I want a kind of blue in the shadows, so I can move the saturation slider first and then the hue slider until I reach the kind of color I want, something like this, for example. And then maybe I can raise the brightness. Okay, so the color I want is more visible. I can increase the saturation. Let's say now I'm fine with this color. Okay, so now that you have an idea on how this tool works, let me say 3 points that I really love about this tool. The first, speed. You can see how fast this tool is to create the kind of curves I need. Now, even if I am a curves ninja or something like that, it's impossible to make 3 separate curves in a matter of few seconds. And also, the kind of complexity I need is impossible to reach manually, okay? The second is flexibility. As any curve is created into a single channel, this means that I still have the RGB master curve to make any kind of move I want in terms of course, of luminosity change. And third, it's very intuitive and easy to use. By moving just few sliders and looking at the results in real time, I can decide very quickly if the kind of color I'm getting is the kind of color I need for shadows, midtone, or even highlights. And this is why also I suggest that you first start from an image, a test image like the one we have seen so far. Okay. Of course, you will need some practice and some image analysis to get the best results, but you get the point. Now, let's see few real world cases. For example, what if we tried to apply the same curves to a real-world image like this? Well, easy to do. Just click on the Match button and you can see the final result. Okay, I would say this kind of curves can work also on an image like this. Maybe I can just reduce the blue in the shadows, so I'm gonna lower the saturation, and also maybe something like this. Okay, now another nice option can be to load the luminosity mask before applying the same kind of curves. So I'm gonna throw this layer and maybe click on the dark 3 button. This loads the dark 3 as a selection, and then press match. Okay, this is a nice effect, a softer effect. Or maybe I can, I'm gonna throw away this layer, I can load a dark 1 mask and see the final effect. I think this is okay. Now that I have a mask, maybe I can increase the blue in the shadows. And also, what you can see is that when I change all the kind of settings, the tool reloads the same kind of luminosity mask I've loaded before running the match. Now, still talking about the luminosity mask, maybe I'm gonna load a lightness mask, like L1, for example. Okay, don't forget to choose every time a bitmap layer, so I can run, for example, lights 2, and then try to make lightness like this. Okay. I think it's too soft. I'm gonna load the L1 selection and then press match again. And now what I can do is to try to change the kind of color in my highlights. Okay, something like this. And I think now you know what I mean by the word flexibility. I can make 2 different kind of curves, load 2 different kind of luminosity masks, and every time I change the settings, all the masks are reloaded. So I can have the maximum flexibility. Also because we still have here 2 different layers. So I can play, for example, with the opacity of each one, or even the blending modes. I can group those layers inside a group and maybe lower the opacity. Okay, so far so good. Another option could be to use the CurveM tool for matching colors sampled maybe from another image. Now, of course, this tool doesn't have the artificial intelligence for knowing how sampled colors can be transferred from one image to another, and therefore cannot match colors between 2 images that maybe are very different, both in terms of color, but first in terms of brightness. But we can use another utility available inside the Mindthecolor extension to match the brightness of the 2 images before running the CurveM tool. Let me show you. For example, let's say I would like to match an image like this to an image like this one that is pretty different in terms of tonal range and colors. The CurveM tool can help me to find the right colors to match, of course. So first I'm going to click on the sample image, and on the H1 button I'm going to choose a very bright color, like here in the highlights, something like this. Okay. Now as for the midtones, I would like to sample something here. Maybe around 50 in the L channel. Okay. And for the S1, I would like to sample something pretty dark. Now that I take a look at the values I have, I can see that the color I'm sampling is not really a pure black, because I have a 7 in the A channel of LAB, and also this is confirmed by the HSB values, because I have a 71 in the saturation and a little bit of brightness, 9% in the brightness. And also the hue is around here. So what I'm looking to is a kind of very dark magenta color. Now, before I try to match the colors, the nice question is how much can I match these 2 images with the CurveM tool? Of course, it depends from how close the tonal range of the original image is to the reference one. And this is when the false color utility comes into play. Now, if you don't know false color into the retouching field is pretty unknown, of course. But into the video field, it's one of the most used tools for matching the exposure on set. And thanks to Carlo Diamanti, we now have a false color utility available inside the Mindthecolor extension, where into the retouch area, let me show you, I can click on the retouch button, and there you go, false color. And when I click on this button, false color creates a tonal range map and a color palette in which every color is related to a specific brightness value of the image. We have purple for almost pure black, blue and cyan for deep shadows, dark grays for lighter shadows, greens for the midtones, pinks and light grays for bright tones, and yellow and orange for highlights, and red for almost pure white. So I'm gonna go in the original image and click again on the false color to create the color map and color palette. And now I can see how much the left image is darker than the right one. So I can take decisions. I can use, for example, a curves layer to change the brightness. And once I have more or less the same map colors, I will know that the two tonal ranges are close enough. Maybe something like this is good enough. So I'm going to turn off the false color in both images. And now I can go back on the Curve M tool and try to match the colors. So first the highlights. Maybe I can dark the highlights. And also, okay, yellow cast. Okay, I would go for the midtones. Okay, and now for the shadows, I would try to increase the brightness to see the kind of color I'm getting. And okay, we need to match a kind of purple here, dark purple, so I can go down with the brightness. Maybe move this to the reds. And increase the saturation in the highlights, for example. Okay, now it looks more similar. Okay, decrease the saturation. Maybe increase the saturation in the midtones as well. Just a little bit of yellow, maybe. Okay. Now maybe I can change the brightness of the image. Something like this. And again, trying to change with the Curve M tool. Now I can throw away the first set of curves. That's before and that's after. Okay, I would say for sure not a perfect match, but a good enough match. But now you get the point. This tool is not made for matching very precisely two images, but it's made for assign a certain kind of colors in shadows, midtone, and highlights. Therefore, you should consider always the kind of colors and brightness you have and how far you want to go. The other thing you should consider is also that the Curve M tool works always with a single set of curves. And curves are not made for extreme moves, because sometimes can happen that few points are too close one to each other. So you can't really reach the kind of color move you want if it's an extreme move. If you want to do that, maybe you should consider another tool that is color wheels. If you don't know color wheels, well, color wheels are the most common tool into the video field for color grading. And now, thanks to Carlo Diamanti, we have color wheels available inside Photoshop through the Mindthecolor extension. And this is what we will see in the next video.